Nancy, you were so efficient at that. I'm wondering if we could, so thank you for leading us through that. That's fantastic. I'm wondering if we could jump ahead on our agenda and maybe start with a little bit of the background information about the reconciliation process. Congressman Phillips is due at 10, or excuse me, 9:45. So we do have a few minutes to go ahead and get started. Would everybody be okay with that change in the agenda? Which really means that I'm teeing up my colleague Deb.
Okay. So just so people know, hearings actually started yesterday at the federal level in the Ways and Means Committee in the House, as well as the Education and Labor Committees in the House. Paid leave, childcare, and we're part of both of those hearings yesterday. So the process is underway. Some language is out there that we've been able to take a look at. And I think Laura may have shared some of that language with you. So we are expecting that the details of these bills, they actually began taking amendments yesterday in committee, none of which were accepted, just as it is in the Minnesota legislature, where often the majority party, has agreed to some processes, and then the minority party is offering amendments to kind of telescope their concerns. So it's been, I think, an important process to learn more about kind of where both parties are at, although we expect that, again, the Democrats, like the American Rescue Plan, are going to be the ones who will decide the details and ultimately be the ones voting for the package as it moves through the process. So now is the time. So we're very excited to have Congressman Phillips be joining us today. And we'll be talking later on about opportunities to reach out to our entire delegation, even though, the Democrats in our delegation are likely to be the ones voting for the package and having a lot of power. We believe these issues are important for our entire delegation, and they're bipartisan issues, and we want to keep it that way. So we're not letting any members of the delegation off the hook in terms of making sure they know how important these issues are for infants and toddlers and new parents in our state. So I'm, I don't know how much detail will we, Laura, you were hoping we would get into on the process here, but what we're hoping to convey to Congressman Phillips is just how important these issues are, to make sure they're all included in the package that eventually passes. Obviously, the framework calls for $3.5 trillion investment over 10 years. We expect that number might come down. So we obviously want to make sure that as that happens, these issues are included. We're hearing a lot from federal lobbyists that climate activists are of course, I consider myself a climate activist. I believe that's really important, but they're not hearing as much from people on the kind of family support pieces of this package. So I think that that's part of what we're really hoping to hear more about with and share why we're talking to Congressman Phillips today, to make sure he understands how important those are. And we really need to kind of step it up, I think, as a community, to make sure that our members of the delegation are hearing from us just how important these issues, the human infrastructure pieces of this package, are to Minnesotans and to the future of our state and the country, frankly. So I'll stop there. I don't know if we want to open it up to questions, or Laura, there was some other things you were hoping I would cover as part of this, but open.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Deb, if it makes sense, if you could just briefly highlight kind of what you're hearing around the paid family medical leave, and because they did start to hear that yesterday, and then any of the early information we know about the child care sections of the bill or the child care tax credit. We have a couple more minutes because the congressman has not yet arrived.
Yeah, so The paid family leave proposal that's been put out yesterday is very comparable to the House File 1200 that we have been talking about as a coalition. It would provide 12 weeks of paid leave with partial wage replacement for all of the kind of FMLA pieces that we've talked about, which I think the pieces that are really important for us are the, obviously the parental leave, as well as maternal medical leave for issues during pregnancy and recovery from pregnancy. There's the one big change that I'll just highlight here for folks is that the program as it's structured now that's being considered would actually be run through the Treasury Department as opposed to the Social Security Administration, which is a big change from the Family Act. And it would be paid for by taxes on corporations and wealthy Americans as opposed to kind of a social insurance model. So there's pros and cons to that. That's just kind of the political situation now is that the president has pledged not to raise taxes on anybody earning less than $400,000 a year. So, that's what's being considered now in the paid family leave space. There are some real advantages to the program running through the Treasury Department. One of those is that it's very clear that like the child tax credit, those kinds of benefits then don't count against other benefits. There are obviously the Social Security Administration has its hands full administering the Social Security program and other programs. So anyway, there's some advantages and I'm happy to, have more conversation about that offline. On the childcare front, I think what we're seeing is sort of two buckets of support being advanced. One would be for universal pre-K, and the other would be a significant expansion of basically the CCAP or the CCDBG, Child Care Development Block Grant Program that would increase investments from the federal government to states. It would increase the eligibility up to 200% of statewide median income. It would cap copays at 7% with no copays for up to 75% of the statewide median wage. So, income. So, and it does give lip service to mixed delivery, which is something many of us have been fighting for, but there are some concerns about a couple of things. The way that the two buckets are funded, not to get into too much detail, but the universal pre-K part is kind of front-loaded with heavier support from the federal government than the CCDBG part. So there's some concern about that and what kind of incentives that might create for states to take up that piece and not take up the childcare piece. Obviously, just the concern about the bifurcation and the complexity of having these two different buckets. But I will say that obviously, we are excited to see significant investments in that. And then there's just some work being done to make sure there's plenty of teeth to actually ensure that both of those buckets are truly mixed delivery. In particular, the universal pre-K is set up in such a way that would ensure all kinds of providers would be able to access that support. I'm happy there's lots of people with expertise on this. Claire's on. If Claire wanted to say, and I don't know if Congressman Phillips is already here, but no, okay, well then maybe Claire, I don't know if you want to add a little bit on the child care front.
Welcome, Emma.
Thank you.
Yes. We're just waiting on the congressman, correct?
Yes, that's right. I apologize. My dog's water bowl is right next to me and they're making lots of noise. So I'm going to keep myself on mute for the moment.
No worries. So we'll turn it over to, thank you, Deb, for all of that background. Do you want to, Claire, are you with us still? I know you had you're managing multiple things at the same time. Do you want to highlight any of the details in addition to what Deb had shared about mixed delivery? Okay. I think I know that she had a few different things she was trying to manage, so she might pop back in for us. I think if I can just highlight some pieces that Deb was talking about, one of the things that we're wanting to watch pretty closely is the impact the way the funding is moving forward could unintentionally have on either infants and toddlers and or impacting the mixed delivery. And when you get into the details, and we've seen this as we move through the process together at the state level, depending on what the FMAP is, like the matching rate for the state is, that impacts the state's ability to do these things long term. So it's a lot of these in the weeds issues that advocates such as Deb and Claire and Nancy and others, Marie, who have been really leading in this space for some time for us, have been watching pretty closely. So that's some of the things that we'll want to be paying attention to as well. So, but I think we have a minute more until the Congressman joins us. So I'm wondering if people have questions for any of us on the team who have been trying to track this legislation.
Just respond to Dale's question in the chat. The universal pre-K does not include 0 to 3. And so there would be universal access in the kind of 3 to 5-year-old category under this proposal. And then there would be access, kind of universal-ish access up to 200% of the statewide median income through this expanded childcare assistance program piece of the program.
Thank you for catching that. I didn't see the chat, so. Okay. So I couldn't agree more with what the point that now is the time. Nancy put that in the chat earlier. And when we are done talking with the congressman, and I can also put some of these links in the chat for you, we'll talk about action steps, and we're actually going to try to figure out who is doing what instead of just saying, just do it, because we really have a real opportunity to make some changes that we think will be just wonderful. So, and there was a question about the file numbers. It is the budget reconciliation process. We can get the details to you, Nikki, shortly.
Hi, everybody.
Good morning. All right. Well, Barty, I'll turn it over to you to welcome Congressman Phillips.
Sure. Hello, Congressman Phillips, Emma. It's lovely to have you join us today. We're very excited to have you here and to hear a little bit more from you about sort of all of the work that's happening in Congress right now, and then maybe to share a little bit of information about us. I'll start with a really brief introduction. So welcome. You have joined the Prenatal to 3 Coalition here in Minnesota. We are a statewide coalition that is actually across or an interdisciplinary coalition that is focused on kids 0 to 3, right? So we have doctors and elders and people who work on healthcare issues and maternal and child health, people who work on early childcare and education, people who work on paid family medical leave, people work on economic security for families. So because we know that children don't come in parts, if I can quote Mrs. Marian Wright Ellman in that, and that it really actually takes not only it takes all of these pieces to really make sure that children, particularly young children, have what they need to grow and thrive. And given all of the brain science, the evidence around these pieces, we know that investment in our littlest babies is such a critical investment for our collective futures, and is oftentimes when parents and families have the least resources. It is where we make we are not making as robust an investment as we are later in a child's life. So that's sort of how we have organized it as a coalition, and we're so excited to have you join us today to talk a little bit about sort of what you're seeing in Congress, how Congress is holding the little ones in their deliberations, and I think also just really thinking about, particularly as we think about the issues that are tied to sort of geographic equity, racial equity, and economic and inequities that exist, just sort of where you see those pieces maybe in the reconciliation bill as you're thinking about infrastructure, all of those things. So just a welcome. It's so nice to have you here. And I think I just wanted to kind of kick off the first question, and I think it sort of is sort of why we're organized in the way that we do. But how are you kind of holding the whole child or the whole family in mind as you're going through these, as you're thinking about some of the opportunities that are coming through with reconciliation, with the infrastructure? Like, how are you thinking about whole child, and how do you hold that as you're doing your work here in Congress?
Well, thank you, Barty, for the question. And to all of you, I'm grateful to be with you. And I hope you all know you're preaching to the converted here. Almost every time I have the opportunity to make remarks about early childhood and your work, I reference Art Rolnick from the Minneapolis Federal Reserve, who 20 some years ago issued profound research that quantifies why investments in our youngest and in families results in massive savings of lives and livelihoods and money, which is to me, the beautiful intersection between conservative thinking and more liberal thinking. And that's why I'm such a fierce advocate for early childhood investments. I've done so in my philanthropic and personal life, of course, now my congressional life. And as you all know, significant components of the reconciliation package, the Build Back Better Act, include many of these transformational investments. So when you ask how I hold our youngest, very close to my heart, and both as a father, a son, and a public servant now. So I want to thank all of you, most importantly, for your advocacy, because it in no small way has shaped what I anticipate will be some extraordinary legislation forthcoming. It's not going to be easy, and I surely can't guarantee it based on the dynamics here in Washington, but rest assured, it is of utmost importance. And I want to say thank you. But I know I only have a few minutes with you, but I'd love to hear from all of you if there's anything I should be made aware of, perspectives that you wish to share that I can advocate for here in Washington. I would love to turn it back to you and let you know that you've got a fierce advocate on your side.
Well, I can start. First of all, thank you so much for being an advocate for little children and their families. I would also like to just ask you about the people who do the care and education. It's mostly women, and often the pay that they get is barely minimum wage. And so they are eligible for lots of safety net programs. And do you see, how do you see yourself really advocating for better pay and benefits for the people who do this hard work every day?
Yeah, well, Nancy, the sad truth is in the United States, we over reward the least important and we under reward the most. And that's true amongst our teachers, our educators, our caregivers, our public servants, our firefighters, you name it. And it's a sad truth about our country when the highest paid public official in every state in the United States is usually the football coach at the university. And that's the truth. So to your question, we have an obligation, and I don't want to just limit it to, caregivers. It's teachers. It's people who do the most angelic, important work in our communities on whom we rely. So with that said, there's no magic wand to wave, because the fact is we live in a free market economy. And that's why I support unions. That's why I support collective bargaining. That's why I support increases in benefits and and programs that ensure that people who work hard have the resources to take care of their families. And so I can't promise that overnight we're going to raise the wages of everybody who does this most important work, but as an ethos and a principle, it's foremost on my mind and that of our Democratic caucus. There's no question. And we have to defend those rights, particularly to collectively bargain, because that's the only way to move the needle in many of these cases. Can't just mandate it.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I'm going to invite others to jump in. You have the benefit of sitting with a brain trust here of amazing experts in their field. So I'll open it up to thanks Nancy for starting that off. But others, does anybody else want to jump in and make sure that we're sharing with Representative Phillips?
I'll speak up. My name is Ada Alden, and I, in due respect, support you, sir, and have during all of your occasions for running for our representing our state. I think your job in Washington is not as challenging as being a father. And so I'm particularly interested in the parent education and the importance of providing parents the skills and information they need to interact with their young children.
Mhm. Well, first of all, thank you for your kind words. And I'll let you know that oftentimes my job in Washington is very analogous to my paternal role as it relates to a lot of what we have to do. And, you know, I don't know if I missed the specifics of your question, but to recognize and celebrate what you just shared relative to parenthood and our responsibility in Congress to support families. And that's why so many of the elements of this package are designed for that. As you all know, it's not just early childhood education, it's later education, it's child care, it's supporting families, it's ensuring that we still have a inhabitable planet with our climate provisions as well, without which we're going to have much greater challenges, of course. But I appreciate your remarks. If I missed the specifics of your question, just rephrase it, and I promise you I'll be more direct.
You answered it well. I just think we need to recognize, certainly ECFE has had an impact with its understanding that parents too need to be involved in their early childhood experience.
No question. And you know, and as you say that, I'm reminded so constantly of the greatest blessing is when you have an advocate at a young age. Too many children growing up in our country and certainly around the world lack a single advocate who's looking out for their safety, security, and potential. And you know, my role in public service is to also ensure that those who lack those advocates, parents or guardians, that they stand a chance too. And I think we have to be mindful of both. And that's, I know we're in the same, we look at this from the same lens.
Barb, I'm just gonna, Barb has her virtual, I'm sorry, just gonna, the former teacher in me is like watching who's got their hand raised, and Barb has raised her hand. So Barb Faber, please, thank you for your virtual hand, and feel free to jump in. Yes.
Thank you, teacher. Hi, I'm Barb Faber, CEO of Indigenous Visioning. I work with tribal communities and worked with my tribe in early childhood. And I've worked with these amazing people on this call, fighting for children, families, and communities. And so I support everything that's being said here, but I also want to ask just if you could, first of all, thank you for all you've done. And continue to do for our communities. And one of the things I would like to express is anytime that there could be a tribal set aside, tribes are very strapped. I work with a lot of tribes in Minnesota and outside of Minnesota, especially in rural communities and our urban communities. And there's just not enough funding out there for tribes to especially reach out to our urban communities, because of our in legislative law and language around service areas. So we have many tribal communities in urban areas that are get very, very limited services. So. thank
Yeah,
you.
no, and thank you for your advocacy. And it was a big element of our advocacy during some of the COVID relief programs, is to ensure there were some provisions and set asides for our nation's tribes, and it's same issue now as we approach reconciliation and healthcare funding and you name it. And on that same subject, I have to say, I think our country would be so well served by elevating our Native American history in the United States, and most importantly, prior, especially in Minnesota, where we should be the beacon and the destination for even international travelers who are so curious about this extraordinary history that we too often ignore and keep in boxes and basements, literally at the History Center. And so, to your point, I want to see a combination of a cultural renaissance and an economic renaissance. And it's analogous to so many of the opportunities that we face. Too many look at them as only challenges. And I want to try to be prospectively and accretively optimistic. And I appreciate your advocacy and have great reverence for your perspective, let me assure you.
Claire, I see your virtual hand up. Oh, sorry, and I'm trying to keep track of the other hands too, but Claire, we got you, and then I think we've got Mary Kay, and maybe Jane, did you have your hand up too? Okay, okay, so let's start with Claire, and then we've got Mary Kay, and then Deb.
Thank you so much, Barty, and thank you so much, Congressman. I feel like you need some sort of award for how often you personally come and meet with early childhood advocates, and we so appreciate it.
Thank you. This is my reward. Claire, you're giving me my reward. So thank you.
Well, there, we don't need a plaque. There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
Sorry, Claire with the Minnesota Child Care Association. I can't remember if I said that. We're beyond excited about the possibilities in this reconciliation package. And, as always, we have some concerns now that we've seen the language, and we're working with Emma. She is incredible, kind of in the background around different language issues and things like that. But overall message is we're so excited about this possibility. This could be transformational for our country. And the kind of main thing I'd like to just make sure you keep having in your firepower is that we keep hearing a lot about universal pre-K, and universal pre-K is a good thing. and we're not going to argue against it, but we can't do it at the expense of the younger children, when 80% of brain development happens by age 3, and when the infant toddler years are really the years that economically families have the most difficulty accessing childcare and stay out of the workforce because of that. Exactly. We just really need to make sure that we're giving at least as big an investment for the youngest children and their quality childcare needs as we are for 3- and 4-year-olds.
Here. And Claire, as you know, childcare is a significant component of this package, and it's hard to opine on where exactly the numbers will fall out. And I do suspect, I should let you all know, I don't think it'll ultimately be a $3.5 trillion package. I think it's going to be less, just to be forthright with you, as it emerges from the Senate. But the components, to me, are integral, including childcare, and that's and by the way, your advocacy and as you mentioned. Previous calls have very much enlightened me as to that great need and its importance. So I thank you.
Mary Kay?
Yes, I'm Mary Kay Stronach, the former director of MELD.
Of course, Mary Kay, nice to see you.
Right. And Dean was on our MELD board and did a fabulous job of supporting us particularly. But my question really for you is, there's early childhood. A lot of people talk about early childhood as a bundle. Yeah. And of course, we think that, as Claire just said, that if you don't have the good foundation in pregnancy in the 0 to 3, you're missing a great opportunity, as you have said and others. But what I'm kind of wondering is, and often I think when people talk about early childhood, they never remember pregnancy because that comes out of a different silo. And yet we know that's child development. And so I guess my, my question is, are my concerns correct in terms of the general, when you say the words early childhood, do people really think about pregnancy to 3 in Washington, in the, in the House, in the Senate, or are they really thinking about the 3 to 5s?
It's a very, yeah, it's a really important question, and one that I think by the fact that I can't answer it probably is pretty illuminating as to how many look at it. And yes, I think these issues are siloed. I don't think there's a good understanding among some members of Congress who come from backgrounds such as many of you, perhaps a much more deep understanding and perspective on it. For the generalists amongst us, probably less so. And in that respect, clarifying some of that's actually not just an opportunity, it's probably a need. And to recognize too, of course, for my service on MELD, preparing parents. First of all, I have to say too, you can see how the country's responding to the simple call for vaccines and wearing masks, and this notion of government overreach, and where does the government's role end, and self-determination and personal liberty start. I don't have an answer for you, and I'm struggling with it on all these questions. I'm such a fierce advocate for those who don't have advocacy, particularly the youngest. And I would love to see a nation that commits itself to helping prepare parents and supporting parents, especially those that didn't have good role models themselves. Unfortunately, how difficult that is from a public policy perspective. But back to your question, no, I don't think most members of Congress could separate, delineate, or even understand, frankly, some of the various categories that we are discussing right now. And your advocacy helps do so, and helps me do so, to be forthright. And even this conversation provokes me to look at this through a little bit of a different lens.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mary Kay. Good to see you.
Yes.
Dr. Wilcoxon, do you want to jump in quick? I see your hand raised.
Thank you. I appreciate your presence here, Congressman Phillips.
Thank you, Doctor.
And I would like to highlight a concern that I have about the growth and the strength of our great state of Minnesota, but also the incredibly difficult challenge that we have in addressing inequities that American Indian babies and African American babies and their moms are at grave risk still in terms of problem childbirth, problem pregnancy. And while we do have encouraging programming, we know that the extent of the gravity of this issue is much larger, and we need dedicated support. I just would like to learn more about your ideas and your view on the conditions of inequities in the state of Minnesota for certain populations, but not for others.
Well, no, I think my perspective is probably similar to yours and everybody on this call, which is the inequities are real, and I believe it's a responsibility to rectify those. Unfortunately, hearing this for literally decades in my personal and professional life in the Twin Cities, I've seen very little progress, and if anything, some backsliding, and it's deeply disappointing. I don't have the answers. I have to rely on you to share ideas. I recognize that the slow movement in Congress and state houses around the country requires that the philanthropic community often steps up, as I've tried to do so, of course, in my personal life as well. Minnesota is home to some extraordinary foundations, both public and private, that are in positions to affect change quickly. What troubles me is I haven't seen a policy or a concept that seems to be proven I mean, I wish I had a better answer. That's what I spend most of my days trying to consider. So with that, if there are elements, areas of support that are in need, incubation ideas, new strategies, new concepts, by all means, I hope you'll let us know, my team, because that's how I can be most helpful to all of you and fulfill my mission, which is to help people. That means soliciting good ideas, because they do not originate in Congress. They're brought to us by people like you, Doctor, and so many of you on this call. So with that, I wish I had a better answer. I would love to hear from you. And I would love to pull every lever I can, philanthropic, legislative, and otherwise, to bring people to the table and try to do better. And that's my most important mission.
Thank you.
And I'll tell you one thing else. This is important too. As we talk about inequities, if I might just say too, we Democrats in my caucus talk a lot about economic and racial equity, and I think we would be better served to also include geographic equity. There are people throughout our country outside of our urban areas that are suffering mightily from many of the same challenges, for many of the same reasons, and are suffering the same unfortunate outcomes because of it. And I think we have to talk about broadening equity. And I think we would be more productive, inclusive, and constructive if we did so. And I invite you to join me in that effort.
Yeah, my view on equity is pretty broad, but I thank you for your response.
Thank you, ma'am.
Congressman Phillips, this is Laura LaCroix de Lune. I help coordinate the Prenatal 3 Coalition. And just to reiterate, we actually are focused on the economic, geographic, and racial inequities. And particularly in the maternal and child health area, we see a strong need for this. You've had many of our partners asking questions about that prenatal to 3 space. And you talked about us going backwards. In greater Minnesota, women drive over 2 hours just to get to a clinic where they can have a maternal health visit while pregnant, or a well child visit. And when the economics don't play out for businesses to provide care, we just don't have care. And then, if your child if you have a high risk pregnancy, or if you have a high risk birth, that plays out. So I know we have, Deb has been waiting to ask this question, but I will also just like to point out at the end of we had allowed states to do an extension of the MA coverage postpartum for 12 months. It's a 5-year extension. That would be one way in which we can start to see some of this long term. We'd love to see that extended, that 5-year extension reduced or eliminated, and just have it be an ongoing coverage opportunity for each state. So,
duly noted. Thank you.
Yep. So, okay, Deb, I will turn it to you, because I know that you only have another minute left. So.
I'm sorry, can I just interject? This will probably be the last question the Congressman can take, but I can stay on for a couple minutes and take any follow-up notes.
Great. Okay.
All right. Great. Well, I just wanted to raise 2 proven approaches to addressing disparities that are part of the reconciliation package. One is paid family and medical leave, and the other one is the child tax credit. Both of those things have been shown to affect maternal outcomes, infant outcomes. So really want to thank you for your support of the Family Act in the past. I know you've met with our coalition here in Minnesota that's been working on this issue for 6 years. Really excited to see a strong paid family and medical leave piece.
Here. Yeah, and by the way, we got to catch up with the rest of the world. I never imagined I'd say that so often as a member of Congress, but the truth is, we're not leading anymore, and it's time to do. It's time to at least get back to the mid-pack, let alone lead. And I hear you, and I think we're on the verge of it. So fingers crossed. And I think it's a good way to wrap up my time here with you all. Is keep the faith and keep up your advocacy and stay optimistic. It's just as we're in tough times for obvious reasons, but I say so often that optimism is just as contagious as fear, and we have to deal with a lot of the latter right now. But thanks to all of you, I get to dwell on the former. So Godspeed, and keep the faith. And I'm going to keep pushing, and hopefully here in a handful of weeks, we'll have some outstanding transformational outcomes to celebrate. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Congressman. We appreciate it.
Thank you all so much.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye. And Emma, we would love for you to thank you for staying on a couple more minutes. I know that it looks like Dale, you were trying to ask a question and I did not. Oh, and Joe too. Sorry. I see Joe has his hand raised and then Dale. So Dale, do you want to go first and then we'll turn over to you, Joe?
I certainly can. Actually, it was a comment for Representative Phillips. But I think the answer to his question about, what is it that can be done that's new and different? It's the same old answer. Brain science is very clear, as others have pointed out, that not only does 80% of brain growth occur in the first 3 years, but what doesn't happen in the first 3 years is very difficult to recoup when it doesn't occur as it needs to. Very difficult to recoup in all the years thereafter. What that translates to, of course, as we all know, and I'm not sure Representative Phillips understands it the way we do, but I think he's getting closer to where we are, is that the investment in 0 to 3 is not just a $16 return over the course of a life compared to 1. It's not just that economic feature, but it's also an opportunity to, and I think you'll probably feel like this is some degree of hyperbole, but I think there is evidence for it that it's a cure for poverty. Those that have the least in this instance need to have the most. There's no question about it. And when that happens, then generations of repeating poverty will eventually fade away. And it's got to start someplace, and it might as well be now. Otherwise, it's repeating cycles of poverty and school failure and incarceration and all that kind of stuff, and riots in cities, and you name it. So that's what I have to say.
Thanks for that, Dale. I'll share that with the Congressman.
Great. Are there any last questions for Emma to bring back to the Congressman? Dr. Wilcoxon, I know your message came to me only. Did you want to share that? I don't believe that was your intent.
No, I have not been here as often as I would like to, just because I have other commitments. So I wanted to learn more about what is going on in Washington, D.C., and I'm very grateful for this meeting today. I serve on the ICHIRP advisory group, and Karen Gray is one of our consultants, and that's a program that I look with great hope. But I'm also concerned about a note that Jane put in terms of the low percentage of open vacancy in early Head Start program. I'm also familiar with that. People who know me know that at the very beginning of all of this work, I was an employee of the Department of Human Services leading the Great Start program, which introduced a lot of this brain research, as well as how we can identify early and intervene to help young children have, as best as we can, a typical development. So thank you, but I'd like to start small before I can expand and explore how can I be of assistance. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I know, Emma, do you have maybe 5 more minutes to stay with us? 5-10 minutes left?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, great. So Joe had his hand raised, and then I see Jane and Deb. So we'll go in that order again. Joe, do you want to unmute yourself?
Hi, this is Joe Munich with Generation Next. Thanks for joining us today. This is really a great conversation. I just want to support all that's been said, and I'm certainly no expert in this area. I'm learning, and I enjoy learning from this group. But one thing I did want to make sure I didn't hear was recognized is the economics of early care and education, and just the higher costs of educating the 0 to 3 young people, the babies and infants and toddlers, and how hard it is to sustain programs if there aren't the 3 and 4-year-olds and the older children in the programs as well. And I just hope that we are thinking about some of the unintended consequences of putting resources toward one age as opposed to the other, and just thinking about the economics of how these programs and these, as many people have pointed out, Nancy in particular, about just are barely scraping by as it is, really low wages. And when we start to fund one or the other age, particularly as we look at like 3 and 4 year olds being funded, that it can actually jeopardize programming and quality for younger people if we don't also address the 0 to 3 age as well.
Sure. Thank you for that.
Okay, so I'll just be really quick, but I just want to draw attention to that first 5 years fund. There's a data sheet that's come out, and it basically talks about just some of the data around what's happening in Minnesota. And one of the statistics that comes back to this geographical equity is that 26% of people in Minnesota live in a childcare desert. And I think that this is the other aspect of even universal pre-K, that we got to really look at this, how across the state people are suffering. And then as a second piece, which comes back to the early Head Start, is that we're really serving only a fraction. But early Head Start is one of the programs that right now we just serve 4% of eligibles. And if we ever really want to close the gap, we've heard it all. I agree with everything everybody's been said, but I just want to just say that there is good work that's been done and there's good work we could do more of. So I just thank you, Emma.
Great, thank you, Jane.
Thanks, Jane.
All right, let's go to Deb, and then I see Joan has a question after Deb.
Yeah, just real quick, I wanted to just dig in a little bit on paid family medical leave. As Congressman mentioned, there's likely to be cuts to the total dollar amount. And I'd love to, check in with you later offline here about like that particular policy area and as they look at cuts. But one of the things I just wanted to really lift up, because I think this gets lost a lot, is that we talk a lot about family leave and the, parental leave after the birth of a child, but 2 earlier points, the #1 use of medical leave in states with these programs is for pregnancy related conditions. And so I just want to make sure that's not lost as we look for ways to cut, because oftentimes medical leave is one of those things that people look to cut. And I just wanted to draw your attention to that. And then on the child tax credit, 322,000 Minnesota kids don't get the full credit before the expansion because their families earn too little. That's too little. So, as they look at proposals to, again, bring the cost of the CTC down, wanted to just make sure we had an opportunity to connect about how critically important maintaining and making permanent the refundability of that tax credit is, especially for the lowest income kids in the state. So I'll stop there and connect with you offline on those 2 pieces. I know, we're continuing to connect on childcare as well, but I just wanted to make sure that we've made that connection on those 2 pieces as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. I should just, for all of you, say my colleague in our Washington office who usually covers these issues recently left our team. And so I am trying to learn how to track the progress in the committees sort of on the fly here. Usually that would be something I could reach out to her for. So I know that I will be continuing to reach out to my team out there as well as committee staff to make sure I'm staying up to date and getting this information back to you if you need it. But you also might know some things that I am not aware of just yet. So please feel free to, I'll put my email in the chat and you can inundate my email inbox. I would not mind at all. So we'd love to connect with any and all of you offline.
Great. Do you have time for one last question from Joan?
Absolutely.
All right, Joan, you're up next.
Hi, I'm Joan Bolfer with the City of Bloomington Public Health Department, and I've had the privilege of working over the last 10 years with a group of Latinas that are working to help train and support family, friends, and neighbors. And this is a group of childcare providers who are not in the formal system, that are often forgotten, that are rarely paid attention to, but we know, at least in our area, are the primary caregivers for our immigrant families, our refugee families, and our low-income families. And so what I would like to just put forth is that in whatever programs are supported, that we do not forget this important group of caregivers. They are often don't have the training or expertise to prepare children for the American school system. And so this has, reverberations in how kids can be successful. And so I just want to put that out there. I don't know how it will fit into the bill, but it is a group of providers that is just left in the dark, in the shadows. They do not get the support they need. So thank you.
Emma, can I just add on to what Jonah is saying? I think one of the things that we saw happen in Minnesota, just so you know what happened in Minnesota, when there were some additional flexibilities in how we allowed states to manage the childcare crisis and needs around childcare during the pandemic, it allowed, those flexibilities allowed the state of Minnesota, our Department of Human Services, to direct some funds to family, friend, and neighbor care. When we prescribe too much, provide too much detail and prescribe how funds get used, what age range they get used for, it makes it more challenging for states to help meet the broad needs of families. Like, we really don't want to take away family choice. And so if we can at all support families, depending on where they're choosing, we want quality care, which makes most sense for that family. So flexibility in the funding is critical. And I know there's a number of us who will follow up with you offline on some of the details around this, but we'll make sure we add that in and kind of share how Minnesota has started to address or provide at least some resource to help better connect with care providers that Joan is mentioning.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I hadn't seen anything in what I've looked at in the reconciliation package so far that would address this issue. So would be curious to hear your thoughts on any programs that are existing that might be able to be made a little bit more flexible in order to accommodate.
Yeah, we will follow up with you on that for sure. So, okay. Well, I know you gave us some extra time this morning. Were there any last questions for Emma before she heads out? Okay. All right. Well, thank you so very much for joining us. And
thank you. I'm happy to anytime. And like I said, I'm going to throw my email into the chat before I sign off here.
Perfect.
Appreciate you all and all of your work.
Yes. Thank you so much. All right. Great. Well, why don't we go ahead and circle back to the other part of our agenda. Now we'll keep moving forward. Deb, thank you again for providing some of the details around what is happening with the budget reconciliation process. Now we get to talk a little bit about how we need people to act, or what actions we're asking people to take. Do you want to talk briefly about the action alert and the social media strategy that has been discussed, and then I'll add some links to the chat.
Sure. So we have a smaller group. Many folks here, although not all, are part of the ECE Advocates kind of world, and we've created a small subgroup that's been working on federal advocacy actually over a series of months. That smaller group has been working and put together an action alert that would allow, we've done many of these focused at the state legislature, right? But we also have one now that's really focused at our congressional delegation. And I think Laura is going to throw that in the chat. We also have a social media toolkit. And we're also hearing that we really need to not forget the White House as we look at some of the concerns that have been raised on this call today around childcare and universal pre-K. If some of you have listened to, the Biden administration talk about the reconciliation package, they have, mostly talked about universal pre-K and the idea of adding 4 more years of education to our system, 2 at the beginning, 2 at the end. And so there are still some real concerns that the White House isn't understanding the issues we've talked about today around infant and toddler care, around the relationship of universal pre-K to childcare. So those are kind of 3 pieces that we're hoping advocates in Minnesota can engage around. Claire is also on, she's part of, Nancy's on, Laura, many people on this call have been part of kind of developing these tools, but as Laura mentioned, we're really hoping that people can commit to doing one. We also want to acknowledge that we know some people can't, from an organizational perspective, engage in advocacy efforts. But there are also ways you can engage personally as an individual. And even if you feel like you can't engage as an individual, you can encourage your neighbors, your family, your friends. Our action alert is written so that it basically will allow anybody across the country to put in, some opinions about the childcare, the need to, have significant sustained investments in childcare in this package. It works for anybody in any state. I know Claire is gonna tap into her networks across the country. So there's a lot of ways, in this moment to engage. I know that some of you also participated in a webinar that we had on the child tax credit. And the Children's Offense Fund National Office has an advocacy hub related to that. I could throw that in the chat. So if you're interested, similarly in weighing in on the CTC, let me know, or we'll throw that in the chat. And that's a good way to, again, share that advocacy hub, which allows people to either call their congressperson to talk about another important piece there, right, is these stories about how the CTC has impacted people's lives are really, really critically important to making sure that those changes become permanent. And then on the paid leave front, if you're interested in getting involved in advocacy on the paid family and medical leave front, contact me. Maybe we can, I'm pretty sure you all have my email, but we're still kind of assessing our best approach there and trying to understand better what, what some of the kind of hangups might be, assessing what happened in the hearings yesterday, assessing, what that implies for, what the potential compromises might be or what the concerns might be with the proposal that's actually been put forward. So I don't know, Claire or Nancy, if you want to put an extra plug for the childcare pieces. And Laura, I don't know how you want to facilitate people committing to different pieces here, but I'll stop talking and answer questions or see what.
My name is Ada Alden, and I want to say a special greeting to Barb. I remember spending time with you at the White Earth Reservation and remember the experience fondly. I believe that all of us on this Zoom are connected in spirit and purpose and vision. I also know that the 6 to 12 elementary group is dedicated and purposeful. I also believe that college and higher ed is dedicated and purposeful. I am not clear that early childhood groups are other than fragmented. And I worry about the differences of view in early childhood groups that is not represented in this group, because I think we all have a shared purpose and understanding, but there is a fragmentation in early childhood segments.
Do you want me to touch on that, Deb, or do you want to?
I'd love that. I would love someone to say something about that.
Ada, this is Laura. I think there are a number of people who are working to address where we have shared agreement and stay focused on where we have shared agreement and raise our voices in ways that the shared agreement gets heard first. You know, I think the challenge is that people have different because the whole system, the way it is it's not working well for most people, whether you're a provider because you're not, it's difficult to make resources, whether you're a parent, it's difficult to pay. And so we lean into like these nuances that aren't working instead of saying, you know, raising up and saying we need funding for children 0 to 5 until they enter kindergarten and start with that high level shared message. I will just say I have seen many people on this call focused on that instead of getting caught up in the detail and saying, I need funding, this needs funding. It's really this whole big picture. We need funding. It's underfunded. This whole system is underfunded. Childcare specifically, think about that, but all infant and like all maternal child health efforts too. So those tend to be underfunded, like paid family leave, the child tax credit, all those things. So I do think there's a strong effort, and the more we can speak to that, the better. Deb, I think I cut you off. I apologize.
Oh, that's great, Laura. I mean, I think there's no shortcut here. We're doing our best to try to build relationships, develop understanding, to find areas where we can work together to, at a minimum, not undercut other, you know, people's priorities that are important to children. You know, I don't know if Barty got back on or not. I know she was having some internet problems, but you know, CDF's been very committed, and as have others on this call, to trying to do our best to, you know, this is a part of the scarcity mentality that, you know, pits us against each other instead of, you know, recognizing, and there was some really great testimony at the federal level yesterday in committee about this. You know, these investments in families and workers and people have actually declined in our country over the last 30 years. We're not talking about, we're just talking about trying to get back to, you know, where we were, and that there is a significant wealth, and significant wealth was gained even during the pandemic in our country. And what we're talking about is making sure people are committing their fair share through this package, you know, significantly, and then using those resources to address all these interlocking needs. And so, you know, I don't, you know, I'm open to other thoughts. We're always open to other, anybody who wants to step up and continue this work with us in terms of bringing people together through Jane, the work that you've done through the Prenatal 3 Forum, you know, the work that we're doing in the ECE Advocate space, the work we're hopefully going to do in this task force, the Great Start task force, to bring people together, to come together around some kind of a solution in the childcare space. So, you know, I'll just stop talking, because I mean, I'm just preaching to the choir here. I think this, as you said, this is a group that is committed to trying to figure this out and how to build relationships and move forward together.
I think too that, you know, early childhood is so many things, and it's such a complex time of life, from prenatal to, you know, age 5 or to kindergarten. And so we need complex, really, solutions. There's not going to be one solution that's going to, you know, like paid family leave is fabulous, and it's not going to solve every issue. Childcare needs funding, but it's not going to solve all early childhood issues. And so I think one of the things that as advocates, we need to be sure that we do when we're advocating for what we believe in, not to put other solutions down, or try to, you know, like, I think what we need to do is like maybe family, friend, and neighbor providers are my niche. But when I see that someone else is looking for funding for pre-K, not to put down pre-K, I think we have to look at, is it good for children? Then let's not be negative about it, but let's also try to, work together, because it's going to be take lots of us and lots of solutions.
Mary Kay has her hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that one of the things that I took away from the comments from Phillips was the answer to my question about how much do people even distinguish, the different parts of early childhood. And it made me realize that I think that and maybe Deb, you're already doing this, but when I think of contacting my legislators, I'm in the part of the state where they're probably already gonna, vote my way on this stuff. But the others, it really made me wonder what kind of effort are we putting into the other legislators that may not distinguish some of the issues that we have. And do we have some kind of a one page? I mean, each of us could write it, but one page deal that would really show about the necessity of foundations in early childhood, which is the pregnancy to 3 range. Have you done anything or tried to isolate that group of legislators, both in Minnesota, I think, and federally?
So Mary Kay, this is Laura. We have over time, we still have on our website the original kind of brochure that talks about the building blocks. So that is accessible for everybody to use and go back to. I can put a link to our website in there where that particular brochure is. It can still be used as a way to help educate people, because I do think you're right. People are not going to understand all the people when they hear early childhood, I think still really think 3 and 4 year olds, because that's as we all know here, it's the time in which public investments tend to show up for children and families. So it's not surprising that we've worked our way backwards and we're not paying as much attention to the brain science. So I want to recognize, so I will put that in the chat, I would love to just take a moment to actually ask people to say in the chat, if you don't, like Barb, I know you're in the car, so you might not be able to put it in the chat. But please let us know specifically if you're willing to complete the action alert. Now, the action alert that I put in the chat, I will also send out. If you're willing to do the action alert, and if you're willing to reach out to the White House, and if you're willing to do it for yourself, and if you're willing to forward it, and let us know who you're going to forward it to, just so we know what to expect. We're trying to figure out how far our reach is, and the action alert is useful. It can be forwarded to anyone, it can be personal contacts. If you're representing an entire network, you can do it that way. So that would be really important. Deb just put that in the chat again. I put the bit.ly option of it, the shorter version in it there as well. So you can reach out and find all of those action alerts there, but we really want to know what you're willing to do.
The action alert that I put, or the link I put in for the CTC, just
thank you to clarify. Okay, perfect, great. And I'll grab that also and make sure we send that out to everybody later today. So we really are asking you to let us know very specifically who you're going to share this with, or what action you're willing to take. I also want to highlight, so Deb put in the CTC action alert, and we have a childcare action alert. What we don't have pre-written for you is the connection that all of these issues that they're grappling with in or trying to work through with budget reconciliation matter for infants and toddlers and young families. And so you could take elements, you could take the letter on childcare and then talk about why it's important to infants and toddlers and send that directly. The social media document that I'll send out will have the email addresses so you can directly email. But they're going to be watching social media. They're going to be receiving these action alerts. The more we can get people to send these things out, the better. So
I so appreciate the comments from Deb and Laura. And what I really am hearing is we will increase the size of the choir.
yeah, we need to. We absolutely need to.
Absolutely do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll just go back to my point about, the climate activists. So we're not saying this is more important than the future of our planet. Oh, it should be equally important. And so that's where we absolutely have to increase the choir.
That's right.
And children are a part of the earth. So, like we can't work on one and not the other. They're a package deal, little kids and climate change.
I will, this is Barb. I'll send it out to the tribes here in Minnesota.
There's a question in the chat about timing. I mean, I think the sooner the better. The language is getting released right now. They're really debating this stuff just so that people understand a little bit about the dynamics. Some of you may have been tracking the infrastructure bill. The House has committed to voting on that infrastructure bill. This is the regular, hard hat infrastructure bill by the 27th of September. There are a lot of concerns that if the language isn't nailed down and the House isn't ready to vote on these human infrastructure pieces that we've been talking about today, by that point, that they will vote on that infrastructure, the hard hat infrastructure piece, and and then the whole kind of very delicate coalition that's necessary to support the human infrastructure part could fall apart. So there's a lot of urgency. So that means the next 17 days. Again, there's already negotiation happening with the Senate, right, about how much this package will be brought down. The more we are urging and the more they're hearing from people that all of these things that are part of the 3.5 trillion are important to people, the harder it's going to be for them to cut it down. Just you can't hear the urgency in my voice. I hope I don't want to regret that I didn't do everything I could in this moment to take advantage of this historic opportunity. We know how delicate these things can be and how easily it could all fall apart. So I'm going to try to do every single thing I can. So I hope you will too.
Thank you, Deb. And I think it's, the more consistent we are in sharing these action alerts and talking about the importance this has for infants, toddlers, and young families, the more we can fight off the disagreements that Congressman Phillips was talking about, right? There's lots of things that people are willing to disagree on, but we need everybody to know how important this a healthy early start is for kids and families.
And I think it's important not to do this just once or one day between now and whenever. I think just keep doing it.
They won't block your email. Or your Twitter account. Okay, any questions about what we're asking of you? And thank you. I will download the chat so I can follow up with people next week, but I will get out the information today. Again, I'll send that out to the whole list. But questions about this before we move on to our last agenda item? Okay, thank you, everybody. All right, so here's what we wanted to spend a couple minutes. Well, we were going to spend a few more minutes, but we're now going to spend a few less talking about next steps. Let's planning ahead. It's hard to believe that we're going to be approaching another legislative session in the near future. We're still trying to better understand what has happened with the legislation that passed at the end of session and the special session. So what we wanted to do is in many other spaces or different places, we're starting to talk about what policies passed that we've been supporting and what is happening or how they're being implemented in the different agencies. And so what I thought we would do is make sure in October that we begin to bring some other guests into our meeting. We know that the MA postpartum extension happened. Expansion happened. We know it begins July 1st of 2022. And so we want to make sure we're talking about how that impacts some of the other policies that we've been talking about. So there was the iChirp expansion. So trying to better understand how MA and iChirp are connected. We had the Department of Labor and Industry, the protections around pregnancy and lactation supports, and the home visiting language and additional resources that went into home visiting. And then the Healthy Start Act is working with parents who are pregnant and parenting those first 12 months in prisons. So there's been a lot of conversations happening in different places. We want to bring that to you all so that you can better see that. So we can start to identify those gaps, like where are the gaps in maternal and child health that we had on our platform last year. How will the funding and the policies that were implemented this year impact our policy goals moving forward? Like for instance, I know funding for infant and early childhood mental health did not happen. There were resources for mental health, but not specifically for infant and early childhood mental health services. So that is something that we had on our policy platform that we will likely want to look at and talk about moving forward. And then similarly, Deb, I know that Deb is leading on the childcare stuff for us here at Prenatal to 3 as well. There were a number of childcare policies that passed. So the CCAP rates, childcare assistance program rates passed. We know we have a new childcare task force that will be started looking at the financing mechanisms. We're looking at wait lists, and yet we don't have anything in place that will really help us solve the issue, the financing issue, the business model of childcare. So there are additional gaps, and we want to be ready for the 2022 session because there's still $1.2 billion in ARPA funds sitting there on the table, per se, the invisible table, for the state of Minnesota to help meet the needs of children and families across the state. So those are some of the things that we're planning ahead. Deb, did I miss any like gaps, like examples of gaps that you're paying attention to?
I just wanted to underscore, what you were saying. There's also $500 million the governor's office was given authority to use in various ways that he saw fit. There's actually a form that people can fill out to suggest ways that the governor should use those funds. So maybe Laura, we can share that with this group to make sure that we're getting some of these. Again, this is short-term money, it's one-time money, but there's a lot of needs and a lot of things, a lot of causes in this group that could use some support even in the short term. So Laura, I'll make sure you have that and you can share it with the group.
And don't forget that your counties and cities are also getting ARPA funds, and they can use those funds for childcare. So don't forget to, check with your county administrators or whatever the format is in your county, but check with them and encourage them to use some of their funds to support childcare.
Thank you. And some of these other issues that we're talking about, they're really flexible funds that went to counties and cities, so they can use those resources for a number of things. Like, for example, I know Hennepin County just announced they are putting a 10 million of their ARPA funds into inequities in maternal and child health outcomes, and 20 million in mental health services. But even of the 20 million, it's not touching the infants and early childhood, except through, well, they're putting some money into home visiting. So it depends on how they differentiate that. So, okay, is funding for housing on the agenda? Dr. Wilcoxon, we have talked about the need for housing, just looking at the chat here. It has not been on our advocacy agenda, other than to recognize how critical it is. So when we talk about gaps and when we talk about our agenda for 2022, I hope you will continue to bring that back to the council. Okay, so I have 4 more minutes. I just really wanted to highlight the 2022 session, a couple things that we're watching. There have been a number of changes in leadership in the last month or two, particularly in the Senate. So everybody is, both the House and the Senate are up for and the governor. Everybody is up for re-election in 2022. Because of redistricting. So that is why we're, even though the Senate was elected just 2 years ago, everybody is up again in Minnesota because of redistricting. And the Senate Majority Leader, Senator Gazelka, and the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee, Finance Committee in the Senate, have both announced that they are running for governor. So Michelle Benson, who joined us earlier in the year, is also running for governor. So I want to make sure everybody is aware of that. It's my hope that we can bring in Senator Benson back to the committee as she's thinking about running and thinking about the 2022 session. Be a good time to talk about our goals again with her as she's running as a GOP candidate. And then also the minority leader. So Senator Kent stepped down. So she is, so they are electing new leadership for the majority and the minority in the Senate. The election for the minority party will happen on Monday. And I'm just, Jeremy Miller got elected to be the new Senate majority leader. So, how this matters is that, like, who becomes a priority contact for us in the 2022 session will shift somewhat with all of this, with all of these changes. So questions at all about changes in leadership in the Senate specifically?
Just, does that mean that we are also going to be, you said bringing back Michelle Benson, but are we also going to be having Paul Gazelka and Walls come and talk to us too, to see what their agendas are for early childhood, prenatal to 3?
Nancy, I love that. I love that question. I think that's something we should talk about. I think we haven't always brought gubernatorial candidates to the coalition, but it might be something that we can partner with some of our other with you all in your different roles. We may want to think about suggesting something before the 2022 election. So
I just don't want to bring one and not others, because I don't want it to seem like we are endorsing one over another.
Yeah.
Laura, this is
Yes.
Marty. Hi, everybody. I had to switch to my phone because I'm having the worst internet ever today. But one of the things I just wanted to point out that in 2018, CDF and Children's Hospital and a whole host of other people hosted like gubernatorial conversations on health.
Yeah.
With both I think the both parties were present. They weren't on the same day. It wasn't a debate,
Right.
because there wasn't a lot of appetite for a debate conversation, or but they both agreed to participate in that conversation around children's health. So I guess I just wanted to highlight that that's something that we can be thinking about for next year. And I absolutely think that if we would be willing to work with other coalitions or other partners who are interested in it, it might be helpful if that's some desire of the group to do.
Yeah, it looks like we're getting thumbs up and other comments in the chat about this as well, Artie. So
I just wanted to say, though, that there's no reason we couldn't put her back as Senator Benson as the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee in the Senate. There is going to be a supplemental budget this year. There is going to be decisions about this 1.2 billion in federal funds that still remain. So we were expecting a budget surplus. We knew that was projected unless things really change with Delta or whatever. But so I agree with the idea of having a governor's, kind of forum or something. But I also think there's no reason we shouldn't be pursuing our legislators for this next legislative session.
yeah, thanks, Deb. I actually was thinking, because I want Senator Benson to hear how some of these how these policies are starting to be implemented, and also understand the grace of time, because many of our state agencies are very far behind in hiring. So in order for them to even HR is far behind in hiring. There was a hiring freeze early on in the year. So it is easily going to be, October, November, December before job descriptions for a lot of these policy changes even get approved and out there. And I just think it's helpful for legislators to be aware of that as they're thinking about the next set of resources that they've had available. So. Okay, and then I think that's everything. So it's 11:02. Some additional support from Denise on this. Okay, any last questions? Sorry, I'm trying to read the chat and look for hands up. All right, seeing none, I will get you all these materials that we've discussed today out in an email. I think it'll take me a couple hours to upload this recording, and then we'll watch for all your tweets and watch for the numbers to rise on those action alerts. So thank you very much, everybody, for stepping forward and identifying how you're going to help support the cause. So, and happy Friday.
Bye, everybody.
Thank
Have a good
you.
weekend.
Goodbye.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.